Good evening and welcome back. Before we start, tell me from which country are you listening? Relax, sit back, and enjoy. Tonight, we journey to the islands at the edge of the world, where gods are born from bathing rituals, where foxes grow 9 tails and gain the power to deceive, and where the line between spirit and human is as delicate as cherry blossoms in spring wind. This is the story of Japanese mythology and folklore, ancient tales that still whisper through temple grounds and shape a nation's soul. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. The birth of Japan, chaos and creation. In the beginning, heaven and earth were not yet separated. All existed in a formless, chaotic mass, like an egg containing all possibilities. This primordial soup was called the Plane of High Heaven, Takamagahara, where the first gods came into being, not through birth, but through spontaneous existence, emerging from the void like thoughts becoming reality. The first 5 gods were invisible and nameless in the ways we understand names. They were concepts more than beings, the framework upon which reality would be built. But after them came gods with purpose and form, and among these were 2 who would shape everything to follow: Izanagi and Izanami, the male and female who would become the mother and father of Japan itself, the jeweled spear and the islands. The older gods gave Izanagi and Izanami a jeweled spear, the Ame no Nuboko, and commanded them to create land from the churning sea below Takamagahara. Standing on the floating bridge of heaven, Izanagi thrust the spear down into the ocean and stirred. When he lifted it, drops of brine fell from the tip, and where they struck the water, they solidified, forming the first island, Onogoro, the self-forming island. Descending to this new land, Izanagi and Izanami built a palace with a great pillar at its center. They decided to marry, and in their courtship walked around this pillar, he from the left, she from the right. When they met, Izanami spoke first, praising her partner's beauty. But this, the ancient texts tell us, was a mistake. The woman speaking first violated the natural order, and their first children were born deformed. Hiruko, the leech child, who had no bones, and Awashima, the pale island, formless and weak. These they set adrift in a boat of reeds, heartbroken. Consulting the elder gods, they learned their error. They performed the ritual again, this time with Izanagi speaking first. From this proper union, the islands of Japan were born, one after another: Awaji, Shikoku, Oki, Kyushu, Iki, Tsushima, Sado, and finally the great island of Honshu. 8 islands in all, and thus Japan's ancient name, Yamato, the land of 8 great islands, the birth of the gods. But Izanagi and Izanami did not stop with islands. They continued to create, and from their union came the gods, Kami, spirits of wind and sea, mountain and field, fire and water. Each element of nature received its deity, each force its guardian spirit. The birth of Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, proved catastrophic. As the infant flame god emerged, his heat burned Izanami terribly. She fell sick, and as she lay dying, even her suffering produced gods. From her vomit, from her feces, from her urine, deities of metal and clay and earth were born. But despite these final creations, Izanami died, becoming the first being to know death. Izanagi was devastated. In his grief and rage, he drew his sword and killed Kagutsuchi, the fire god who had killed his wife. From the blood that splattered and the body that was divided came more gods, of mountains, of thunder, of iron, and the forge. Even in tragedy, creation continued, the journey to Yomi. But Izanagi could not accept his loss. He resolved to journey to Yomi, the shadowy land of the dead, to retrieve his beloved Izanami. Descending into that dark realm, he found his wife and begged her to return with him to the land of the living. Izanami explained that she had already eaten the food of Yomi. She belonged to the underworld now, but she promised to ask the gods of Yomi for permission to leave, making Izanagi promise not to look at her until she had consulted with them. Izanagi waited in the darkness, but patience is difficult when grief and hope war within you. He broke off a tooth from the comb in his hair and lit it as a torch. In that flickering light, he saw his wife and recoiled in horror. Izanami had become a rotting corpse, her flesh crawling with maggots, thunder gods dwelling in her decaying body. Izanami, shamed and enraged at being seen in this state, sent the hags of Yomi to chase Izanagi. He fled, pursued by demons and his dead wife's fury. As he ran, he threw objects behind him. His headdress became grapes that delayed his pursuers. His comb became bamboo shoots. Finally, reaching the barrier between Yomi and the living world, he found 3 peaches and hurled them at his pursuers. The peaches, symbols of life and purity, drove back the dead. At the boundary, Izanagi blocked the path with an enormous boulder. On opposite sides of this stone, husband and wife spoke their final words. Izanami vowed to kill 1,000 people each day. Izanagi replied he would ensure 1,500 were born each day. And thus death and life were balanced, and the gods parted forever. The birth of the 3 noble children, Izanagi, polluted by his contact with death and the underworld, needed purification. He went to a river and performed misogi, a ritual cleansing. As he washed, more gods were born from the dirt and pollution he removed. But the most important birth came when he washed his face. From his left eye was born Amaterasu, the sun goddess, radiant and glorious. From his right eye came Tsukuyomi, the moon god, cool and distant. And from his nose emerged Susanoo, the storm god, wild and unpredictable. These were the 3 noble children, and to them Izanagi gave domains. To Amaterasu he gave heaven and the day. To Tsukuyomi he gave the night and the realm of the moon. To Susanoo he gave the seas. Then, his work complete, Izanagi withdrew from the world, retiring to an eternal rest. But the story was far from over. The relationship between these 3 siblings, especially between Amaterasu and Susanoo, would shape the destiny of the heavens and the earth below. Amaterasu and Susanoo, sibling rivalry. Amaterasu took her place in Takamagahara, the high plane of heaven, bringing light and order to the world. She wove the garments of the gods, tended the sacred rice fields of heaven, and ruled with grace and wisdom. The world flourished under her gentle light. Susanoo, meanwhile, proved troublesome from the start. He wept and raged, longing for his mother Izanami in the underworld. His tears dried rivers, and his storms withered mountains. Finally, Izanagi banished him, telling him to go to his mother if he wished, but to leave the living world in peace. Before descending to Yomi, Susanoo decided to bid farewell to his sister Amaterasu. But when he ascended to heaven, his approach was so violent, mountains trembled, seas boiled, that Amaterasu feared he came to usurp her realm. She armed herself and met him with suspicion. To prove his intentions were pure, Susanoo proposed a contest. They would create gods from each other's possessions. If male gods came from his items, his heart was pure. From Amaterasu's necklace, Susanoo created 5 male gods. From his sword, Amaterasu created 3 female goddesses. By the contest's terms, Susanoo had won. The heavenly cave. Emboldened by this victory, Susanoo became arrogant and destructive. He broke down the divisions between Amaterasu's sacred rice fields, defecated in her palace during a harvest festival. And finally, in the most grievous offense, he flayed a sacred horse and threw its corpse into the hall where Amaterasu and her maidens were weaving. One of the maidens died from shock. Amaterasu, terrified and grief-stricken, retreated into the Ama no Iwato, the heavenly cave, and sealed it with a boulder. With the sun goddess hidden, the world was plunged into darkness. Nothing grew. Evil spirits ran rampant. The balance of creation itself was threatened. The 8 million gods, Yaoyorozu no Kami, gathered in desperation to devise a plan. They brought roosters, whose crowing might convince Amaterasu it was dawn. They hung a mirror and jewels from a sacred sakaki tree outside the cave, and they asked Ame no Uzumi, the goddess of dawn and revelry, to perform. Uzume overturned a tub and began to dance upon it, her movements becoming increasingly wild and provocative. She exposed herself, and the assembled gods roared with laughter. The noise was tremendous, the merriment infectious. Inside her cave, Amaterasu heard the celebration and grew curious. If she had withdrawn and the world was in darkness, why were the gods laughing? She opened the cave just a crack to peek out. The gods had positioned the mirror, the Yata no Kagami, so that when Amaterasu looked out, she saw her own radiant reflection. Told that they had found a goddess even more glorious than her, Amaterasu opened the cave wider to see this rival. The strong god, Ame no Tajikarao, grabbed her hand and pulled her out, and another god stretched a rope across the cave entrance so she could not return. Light flooded back into the world. The gods rejoiced, and Susanoo was punished. His beard was cut, his fingernails pulled, and he was banished from heaven forever. Susanoo's redemption cast down to the land of Izumo on earth. Susanoo wandered until he came upon an old couple weeping beside a river. They had 8 daughters, they explained, but each year a terrible 8-headed serpent, Yamata no Orochi, came and devoured one. Now only their youngest, Kushinada Jaime, remained, and the serpent would come again soon. Susanoo, seeking redemption, offered to slay the beast. He instructed them to brew 8 barrels of strong sake and set them on 8 platforms. When Yamata no Orochi arrived, each of its 8 heads found a barrel and began drinking. Soon the serpent was drunk. Susanoo attacked, cutting the monster to pieces with his sword. As he cut through the 4th tail, his blade struck something hard. Inside was a magnificent sword unlike any he had seen, perfectly preserved and radiating power. This was Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. Recognizing this as a treasure meant for the heavens, Susanoo sent the sword to Amaterasu as an apology. He married Kushinada Hime and settled in Izumo, building a grand palace and finally finding peace. From this reformed storm, God descended many earthly kami, and his redemption was complete. Ninagi and the imperial line Amaterasu, surveying the earthly realm, decided that it should be ruled by her descendants. The land was chaotic, filled with unruly earthly kami and no central authority. She decided to send her grandson Ninigi no Mikoto to bring order. Before his descent, Amaterasu gave Ninigi 3 sacred treasures: the mirror that had drawn her from the cave, the jewels that had hung beside it, and the sword Susanoo had sent her, Kusanagi. These 3 sacred treasures, the mirror, Yata no Kagami, the jewel, Yasakani no Magatama, and the sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, would become the symbols of Japanese imperial authority, passed down through every emperor to this day. Ninigi descended to the peak of Mount Takachiho in Kyushu, and from there began the process of bringing the earthly realm under heavenly rule. He married Konohana Sakuya Jaime, the goddess of Mount Fuji and cherry blossoms, whose name means causing the trees to bloom. From this divine marriage came the line that would eventually produce Jimmu, the first emperor of Japan. The imperial house of Japan claims direct descent from Amaterasu through this line, making the emperor not merely a political ruler, but a living connection between heaven and earth, between the gods and humanity. Understanding Kami. To understand Japanese mythology is to understand Kami, and Kami defies simple definition. Kami are not quite gods in the Western sense, though some certainly are divine beings. Rather, Kami are spirits, essences, forces, anything that inspires awe and reverence. A Kami might be a deity like Amaterasu, but it might also be an ancient tree, a waterfall, a mountain, or even an idea like growth or purity. Some Kami are nature spirits, dwelling in and embodying aspects of the natural world. Others are ancestral spirits, deceased humans elevated to Kami status through devotion and remembrance. The Shinto belief that eventually formed around these myths holds that there are Yaoyorozu no Kami, 8 million Kami, though the number is meant to suggest infinity rather than a literal count. Every stream, every stone, every gust of wind might house a Kami. The world is alive with spiritual presence, and humans move through a reality far more animated and aware than it might appear. This belief shapes how Japanese culture relates to nature, with respect, with reverence, with the understanding that cutting down a tree or polluting a river is not merely an environmental act, but a spiritual one, affecting beings with their own agency and dignity. Yokai, the strange and supernatural. While Kami are generally benevolent, or at least neutral forces of nature and divinity, yokai occupy a different space in Japanese folklore. Yokai are supernatural creatures, monsters, demons, and spirits. But these words don't quite capture their essence either. Some yokai are dangerous, seeking to harm or trick humans. Others are merely mischievous, causing minor annoyances. Some are tragic figures, ghosts bound to earth by unfinished business. And some are neither good nor evil, simply strange beings that exist parallel to humanity. Kitsune, the fox spirits. Among the most famous yokai are Kitsune, fox spirits that can shapeshift, often taking human form. The longer a Kitsune lives, the more powerful and wise it becomes, growing additional tails until it reaches 9, at which point it has reached the peak of its power, and its fur turns golden or white. Kitsune are complex beings. Some serve as messengers and servants of Inari, the kami of rice and prosperity, and are benevolent. Others are tricksters who delight in deceiving humans, often transforming into beautiful women to seduce men. The most malevolent are called nogitsune, wild foxes that use their powers for chaos and harm. Stories tell of kitsune who married humans, living as devoted wives for years before their true nature was discovered. Often, when the family dog barked at them, seeing through the illusion. In some tales, these kitsune wives fled, leaving behind heartbroken families. In others, the love between human and fox transcended the revelation, and they remained together. Tanuki, the shape-shifting raccoon dogs. If kitsune are elegant tricksters, tanuki are their cheerful, bumbling counterparts. These raccoon dog spirits are also shape-shifters, but their transformations are often comical, and they lack the kitsune's refinement and cunning. Tanuki are portrayed with enormous bellies, and even more enormous, other attributes which they use as drums, weapons, or even parachutes in folk art and stories. Despite their crude humor, tanuki are generally seen as jovial and harmless, bringing good luck and prosperity. Many restaurants and shops in Japan still display tanuki statues at their entrances, believed to attract customers and good fortune. Tengu, mountain demons. In the mountains dwell the Tengu, once considered demons, but later evolving into protective spirits. Originally depicted as bird-like creatures with wings and beaks, Tengu later came to be shown with long noses and red faces, wielding feathered fans that could create terrible winds. Tengu are martial artists of supernatural skill, and many legends tell of warriors training under Tengu masters, learning secret techniques. They are proud and easily offended, punishing those who show arrogance, but sometimes rewarding those who show proper respect. The greatest Tengu live on sacred mountains, serving as guardians of the peaks and the Buddhist temples that dot Japan's mountainous spine. Yuki Onna, the Snow Woman. In the depths of winter, travelers through snowy mountains might encounter the Yuki Onna, a woman of inhuman beauty, dressed in white kimono, her skin pale as snow, her breath a frozen mist. She appears during snowstorms, and those who meet her rarely survive. Sometimes she freezes victims with her icy breath. Sometimes she leads travelers astray until they collapse in the snow. But some stories tell of men who showed her kindness, whom she spared, making them promise never to speak of their encounter. Years later, these men might marry, only to realize their wife is the Snow Woman from that night, and that by speaking of it, they have broken their vow. Kappa, river demons. Kappa dwell in rivers and ponds, child-sized creatures with greenish skin, webbed hands and feet, and a shell-like carapace on their backs. Most distinctive is the dish-like depression on top of their heads, which holds water, the source of their power. If this water spills, the Kappa becomes weak and immobilized. Kappa are dangerous, known for drowning people and horses and for trying to pull out victims' shirikodama, a mythical organ said to reside in the anus. But they can be outwitted. Kappa are obsessed with politeness. If you bow to a Kappa, it will bow back, spilling the water from its head and rendering it harmless. They also love cucumbers above all things, which is why cucumber sushi rolls are called kappamaki. Leaving cucumber offerings can placate them. Momotaro, the Peach Boy. One of Japan's most beloved folk tales tells of an elderly couple who found a giant peach floating down the river. Taking it home, they discovered inside a baby boy, whom they named Momotaro, Peach Boy. He grew strong and brave, and when demons from the island of Onigashima began terrorizing villages, Momotaro set out to defeat them. On his journey, he befriended a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant, sharing with them the kibi dango, millet dumplings his mother had made. These companions helped him battle the demons and reclaim their stolen treasure, which Momotaro brought back to his grateful parents. The story is a classic hero's journey, teaching values of courage, loyalty, and filial piety. Urashima Taro, the Fisherman and the Dragon Palace. A young fisherman named Urashima Taro rescued a turtle from children who were tormenting it. The turtle, grateful, revealed itself as a servant of Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea, and offered to take Urashima to the dragon palace, Ryugu-jo. In this underwater paradise, Urashima was welcomed by Princess Otohime, and he stayed for what seemed like days, enjoying feasts and entertainments. When he finally wished to return home, Otohime gave him a mysterious box called a tamatebako, warning him never to open it. Returning to his village, Urashima discovered that centuries had passed. His home was gone, his parents long dead, everyone he knew turned to dust. In his shock and grief, he opened the box. White smoke emerged, and instantly he aged, becoming an ancient man, then crumbling to dust. The box had contained his lost years. The tale is a haunting meditation on time, loss, and the price of leaving the ordinary world behind. The 47 Ronin, based on true events, this story tells of samurai who became Ronin, masterless, after their lord was forced to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, for drawing his sword in the shogun's palace. For 2 years, these 47 warriors pretended to be dissolute and worthless, their leader even becoming a drunk, so their enemy would lower his guard. Then, on a snowy winter night, they struck, killing the man responsible for their lord's death. Having fulfilled their duty and restored their honor, all 47 committed seppuku, joining their lord in death. The story became Japan's greatest tale of loyalty, honor, and Bushido, the way of the warrior. Their graves remain a site of pilgrimage, closing the living myths. Why these stories endure, Japanese mythology and folklore remain vibrantly alive in ways that many ancient mythologies do not. Walk through Tokyo, one of the world's most modern cities, and you'll find small shrines on street corners, offerings left for local kami. Foxes guard Inari shrines. Travelers still leave offerings at roadside Jizo statues. These stories didn't die with modernization, they adapted. Yokai appear in anime and manga. Video games feature kami and heroes from ancient tales. The myths evolved, but never faded, remaining part of daily cultural consciousness. The reasons are many. Shinto, unlike some religions, never demanded exclusive belief. When Buddhism came to Japan, rather than replacing Shinto, the two systems merged, with Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines often sharing grounds. This religious flexibility meant myths could incorporate new elements without losing their core. Moreover, these stories speak to truths that transcend time. The tension between order, Amaterasu, and chaos, Susanoo. The price of curiosity, Izanagi looking back, Urashima opening the box. The importance of balance, respect for nature, the consequence of hubris, these themes resonate regardless of era, the spirit in all things. At the heart of Japanese mythology is a profound awareness that the world is not merely physical matter, but alive with consciousness, spirit, intention. Every object might house a kami. Every place might be sacred. Even tools that have served faithfully for 100 years might develop a soul, Tsukuyomi, and require respectful retirement. This animistic worldview creates a relationship between humans and the world that is fundamentally different from seeing nature as mere resource. The mountain is not just a mountain, it is a being, perhaps even a god. The river is not just water, it is a kami's home, a kappa's domain, a place of spiritual significance. This consciousness shapes art, architecture, ritual, daily behavior. It creates a culture that finds beauty in impermanence, mano no aware, sees ritual in everyday acts, and treats the natural world with reverence born not from environmental policy, but from spiritual reality. The eternal return every spring as cherry blossoms bloom and fall in just days. The Japanese are reminded of beauty's impermanence, of life's fragility. Every summer festival celebrates local kami and ancestral spirits. Every autumn harvest gives thanks to Inari. Every winter solstice acknowledges Amaterasu's yearly retreat and return. The myths live because they are still being lived, still being told, still shaping how a culture sees itself and its place in a world alive with meaning, mystery, and spirit. Closing, and now the story pauses. The kami return to their shrines, the yokai to their forests and rivers, the sun goddess to her place in heaven. But tomorrow they will wake again, appearing in new stories, new forms, adapting yet unchanged. For in Japan, the line between myth and reality was never clearly drawn. The spirits still walk, the old gods still watch, and every shadow might hide something stranger than we dare imagine. Good night,